let's get started on our main character. So when I'm sculpting, the main focus in the early stages is going to be on the primary forms. These are the main masses of the body, the head, what have you. And at this stage, I'm not really sure how far I want to take the head and body area. It was just going to be a bust study. But as we develop it, I actually go quite a bit further than I needed because I wanted the option for when we go to renders to show different angles and kind of tell a little bit more story with the character. If it's too short, the costuming section would be kind of boring. So you can see I'm already doing things a little different than we did in the previous section. This time I used masking and just pulled things out with the low-res Dynamesh, and I'm actually inserting spheres to mass out some of the body shape. Kind of a snowman effect where you take one ball, that's the head, another ball, that's the body, and you can actually build your whole character up this way, and that's how we kind of handle it for him. That's not to say that I always do that. Sometimes I'll just use a snake hook and pull arm shapes out and finger shapes. I find it important to have a variety of ways to work and ways to problem solve, not just to keep yourself from being bored, but also if something's not working, a different approach can sometimes yield more satisfying results. So at this stage right now, I am primarily focused on the bones and masses. So I'm thinking about the head, I'm thinking about the cranium shape. I know I wanted that kind of beluga whale bulge. I know that crescent moon kind of zygomatic arch / horn idea that was going to lead into kind of some sort of ear canal. But first, before I think about those details, I need to start thinking about all the big shapes. Does it read from every angle? Locked in a little bit of the mouth muzzles there. I study anatomy a lot. Used to study focusing more on the names and all of the insertion points. But as I've been working longer and longer, I've forgotten most of the names. But what I've learned is to work on believable anatomy. And I don't think you can do that without having the time where you've studied and focused on these things. But oftentimes I see beginning artists focus so much on being anatomy experts that all of their creatures, all of their characters begin to look like écorchés or as if they were flexing the entire time. There's no fat, there's no tension happening on the muscles. It's just everything is tense all the time. And when you're developing a character, you want to make sure that that's not the case. Every so often you'll work on something that is the need. You want to have this, you'll work on something that is the need. You want to have this roided out, angry, or maybe it's, fleshy zombie character or necrotic something. So it's really good to have that kind of knowledge, but at the same time, more important is understanding form. And more important is understanding the way that these shapes and these forms lead into themselves to make up what we think of as muscles. So, but understanding a basics of joints and the bone area is going to be very important when it comes to animation. It's going to be very important when it comes to making sure you have a believable character. But if all you know is that and you don't understand how fat and muscle and skin and surface detail and all of that can actually affect what's happening underneath, your characters won't look very believable. So when you're studying things like the skeleton and things like the muscles, look for points of reference, keystones, milestones, where you can see perhaps on the clavicle where there's a bone that's coming to the surface, or on the zygomatic arch you'll have a really pronounced cheek perhaps, or maybe some people don't. Maybe they have a lot of fat, so that's all covered up. So still trying to figure out these eyes, and I kind of go back and forth on that because I worry that the direction I first picked was maybe a little too standard, too predictable. So you'll see that we kind of go back and forth on that. And that's one of the important parts of working so low res, is that I can just keep modifying this. Something else to point out, you may notice that I have split off the arms from the body. That's done for a few reasons. One, I can pose them and add a little bit more gesture quickly. Two, if I completely change the body layout, I can keep moving those arms. So these simple symmetrical forms here are going to be very easy to manipulate. Whereas if I had to also move the arms every time, it would slow me down a little. So by having them as separate pieces, I can tweak the proportions and then just move the arms into place. It's kind of like making your character an action figure in the beginning. He's just got all these separate little accessories and joints and things you can unscrew and put back on. And then once you're happy, you fuse them together and you sculpt out the anatomy correctly. Building up the shoulders, the traps. I'd like to make that a little bit more pronounced. I think, although he's going to have a costume covering up the body, I do need to solve the basics. I need to understand what that costume has to sit on. Even if it's not the most beautiful sculpt, it needs to be at least proportionally and structurally where I think it makes the most sense. So making these little eye forms, two different approaches you can do is actually sculpting the eyes in your character, which can look really nice and rough, and I do enjoy doing that sometimes. But if you know you're going to be making something that's got a little bit more personality to it, it can be really useful to split those eyes off. So when we render it, we can put a little shine on them or just have a little bit more control. Think about insertion points right now. What insertion points are kind of where the muscles connect into bone. And you'll see that I'm jumping all over the place. I might work on the face for a little bit, back to the body. Realize that maybe the nostrils idea, that top kind of blowhole-y kind of thing doesn't work, so I'll wipe it away. I like the idea of him having these four eyes, maybe these little sensory pits up here. So by holding control, just like we did to extrude stuff, on an object that you have the entire thing picked, you'll just duplicate that piece, which is really useful. We'll talk more about that later when we get into costuming, because repeating shapes is very useful and very helpful in terms of developing a full costume. So now think about that kind of ocular cavity where how those eyes would sit in. And because of this four-eye thing, there's a difficulty what we're going to have in terms of his anatomy, and that is emoting with the eyebrows. So I'll go back and forth on that a bit and trying to think of how would that move? If he raises his eyebrows up, do those little sensory pits just close? Do they shift and move with it? That seems a little strange. So trying to find out some more bone areas for the muscles to ride over. Now I'm thinking maybe there's a very distinct bony structure happening here. So although I'm still thinking of the primary forms, I'm also starting to introduce some of the secondary stuff. But because I'm working fairly low res at this point, I've gone up a little bit more to add some detail. You may notice that it's still able to be tweaked quite easily. I'm not thinking about detail on any level right now. It's just does the character that I'm looking to make read through here. So what are we looking for at this stage? The mass of the head to the body is something that I knew I wanted to, and I continue as we work to push and pull that. What worked in 2D doesn't always necessarily work in 3D. So although I've done a lot of sketches of kind of how I want that to look, once I start putting in these shapes and I see how lighting affects it, I may push and pull things more. Originally I had this idea for this very pronounced tentacle mustache, but as I'm doing the sculpt, I'm kind of liking the way this looks with a little bit more human lip and maybe just a little tiny bit there. And oftentimes when you have something strange like that on a character, you might get a note saying like tone it down, it's hard for animation, we can't read his lips easy enough, make it more simple. Or you might get the opposite note of we need to go way bolder with these things. So at this stage, we're not going to do it right now because I don't think it would be too valuable, because we're going to do it when we get to the costumes. But at this stage, I might jump into Photoshop and do some paint overs to show direction ideas. Maybe he has a really big tentacled mustache. Maybe these horns get really massive and this cheekbone structure is Very, very strange. Or maybe we get rid of them altogether. And doing that as paint overs could be a lot faster. But because I'm my own client on this one, I get to kind of choose what I want to do. So I'm going to develop it just in 3D. Think of that spine behind him. Again, bony landmarks. There's a seventh vertebrae is kind of, if you reach to the back of your head, right where your neck kind of connects to the torso. Most people, you can kind of see that little bony landmark there. And it's a nice reference point for movement. Also, things just tend to look better when you feel this tension being pulled around, where you can actually tell that there's muscle and there's fat, but there's also something happening underneath all of that. So finding those areas can add a lot of believability to your character. The nasolabial fold on something like this is a little tricky because you've got, that's such a defining feature for humans, for smiling and everything, but for him, his nose is on the top of his head. So I'm trying to come up with something that feels that way, but is also, that gives me the opportunity for movement, so indicating how wrinkling would happen. And here I'm just kind of enhancing out some tendons. Again, it's all about showing that what's happening underneath. And one of the key things with him is I want to keep him fairly simple and believable instead of going like really wild with the sculpting detail. You look at a lot of animals, some of them very wrinkly and bizarre looking. So here we go into Photoshop, and we're going to use the liquify tool. You might wonder why not just do this in ZBrush, and you could. But what's nice about this, I can make a lot of layers, do a lot of quick edits to the whole thing, and once I'm happy with them, go and approach them in ZBrush and see if they look better. 2D as a design tool, almost always faster. And what's nice about this, I have some lighting on it, some color, or not color, excuse me, I have some value with the shadows and everything, so as I'm moving things around, it just informs me a little bit more. I do kind of like where that's going, so maybe we'll try a new one, duplicate it out again. Maybe he's got really small eyes. And one thing I'm looking at here is you don't want a lot of like straight lines on organic characters, and you can see that I keep kind of pulling that bulging front cranium area out and down, because if you keep things too straight and symmetrical, it looks real fake. And although we're sculpting in symmetry right now, I don't want to go too far away from believability. So I'll break symmetry every now and again, but usually I wait until a little further along in the process, because one of the main reasons to work in 3D is to resolve these problems quickly. Now, I'm going back to that idea of the strange sensory eyes, the kind of spidery eyes, because I'm wondering, is he too predictable? Is he too human with what I have? But because of the design brief I have, I know this is a tough one to pull off. Is the mouth enough to really sell this character as something that the audience would like to see? Most likely not. Now, a note I tend to find a lot is making eyes bigger. Bigger. To me, it makes things look a little too cute. You think of a baby or a puppy, the big eyes very quickly goes into, oh, he's adorable. And that's not what we want from this character. But those big eyes also are very easy for the audience to find and the audience to relate to and kind of interact with. Instant personality when you can find the eyes. Very hard when the eyes are away. So now I'm trying to like spread the face out, really break his bone structure, get him out of that human zone. It's a bit much. Going through my options. For those of you who use Photoshop a lot, I'm not going to talk too much about like functionality in here. This program has been around forever and hasn't changed that drastically. But right there, I was just using the liquify and masking it with the red, and I found a lot of people don't know you can do that, which is interesting. Okay, so what am I doing here? There is a feature in ZBrush, which is quite nice, where you can do a see-through effect. So what I've done is I've lined up my Photoshop document and my ZBrush Z tool, and I made the see-through about 30%. What this lets me do is have reference behind my character without having to load it into ZBrush. I could have like a whole sheet that I just kind of move around to. And I'm just going to loosely match this. I didn't spend a lot of time on those quick paint overs, so I'm just going to see if I can't get this to feel nice in 3D. And once I get it to a place where it looks okay, I'll rotate around and see where that breaks. Because 2D, though faster, it's really only solving the one angle. So the whole point of working in 3D is that it might be slower, but you're also resolving you're doing a lot of problem solving very fast. If it works from all angles, you've got something that is going to be pretty good. So here you can see, stretch those eyes out, which look cool in the 3/4, but it's just a bit much. And by a bit much, I mean way too much. So if we want to keep that, we need to balance it. And what that means is pulling areas around, adding more to that cranium. I'm going back to an older version because I might like that better. You do not ever want to be, I use this word a lot, but you don't want to be precious with whatever thing you've done, because moving forward, this whole idea might change. The other thing is when you're working for clients, they might change their mind. They might see this and go, oh, no. We're going to cast famous actor in this role. So this is too far away from their look. Let's make something that looks just like them or has their face, maybe just their eyes. What I'm doing here is I move the eyes into place because although we could in Photoshop move everything around quickly, any extra subtools we'll have to fix in ZBrush. And the symmetry got broken. So you'll see I have mirror and weld dock down there. And those are really, really useful tools, especially when you're doing stuff in Dynamesh. So I use mirror and weld just to fix the symmetry that got broken on those eyes. I want that neck to be bigger and the body to be a little stronger. Too strong, too weak. Tweak stuff around. So starting to get something that feels more interesting. One of the things I like about this design so far is having that kind of indefined chin and little kind of goitery neck. It's something that I want to retain. So here I actually am undoing. I don't undo a lot, but I liked where I was before better. So, as we said, we want to have a costume on this character. So if we're going to do that, we really need to make sure that there's a body to put that costume on. You got something to drape the cloth on, right? So at very least a full kind of rib cage to the upper arm area. The more complex these characters get, the longer they take. If I'm just doing an alien creature or just a bust study of like what that face might look like, you can do these things really, really fast. If you're trying to make a character like this, who's got a costume, who's got a story to tell, the process takes a little bit longer, of course. There's a lot more to think about. So one nice thing about this snowman effect is that they're all separate subtools at first, so I can rotate them around, move them around real easy. It's almost like those mannequins you would get at like an art store. And then when I'm happy, I can just fuse it all together. It's also nice if you feel lazy. If you want to make a forearm, you just duplicate that upper arm and squish it around, and there you go. So you don't always have to start with a sphere or a tube or a cube. Once you have a few pieces going, it goes a little bit faster because suddenly you have something you can use. So here I want to start working on the anatomy a little bit more. I haven't really spent too much time on the arms, and I don't spend a lot of time on the arms, to be honest. It's they're kind of an afterthought for this stage of design. It sounds bad, but one of the ways that I work is I like to keep the unimportant stuff to the very end, and oftentimes that can mean I won't really worry too much about things like hands, the back, not until a design has been looked at and kind of liked. Oftentimes just a 3/4 kind of close-up, chest-up cowboy shot, as they call it, will sell the idea. And then you get to go back and you can take your time a little more and fix these things. So we're doing a lot of broad stroke stuff, but while I'm doing that, I might notice a little detail piece that is just bothering me. Like, he just didn't have the personality I wanted, so I went in there and just kind of added some detail there. Gonna work a little on those deltoids. Get that rib cage reading a little bit nicer, and really think of the way that the muscles would flow with skin on top. I don't want to just carve out every little muscle. I want to feel he's got a little bit of an emaciated kind of feel. You know, you look at look at some of these aging rock stars, and I love like the way that they're still really buff, but they also have this kind of the sagging skin and it's an interesting look. It could be kind of fun to reference. So again, I zoomed way out here because I'm looking at the overall. I'm just going to start getting the basic anatomy put into place. The pecs. I want to feel again that there's something happening underneath, so pardon me, I'm adding a little bit of that bony protrusions in a few areas. Now the head to neck area is going to be the most focused on for what we're doing for these images, so I need to make sure that they're of a little bit more high fidelity. And there's that ear, which I've kind of ignored at this point, but I like the idea that those two kind of tuning fork things are funneling into that ear, so you could spend a lot of time refining these things, but I want to get those beats so that if we do a side shot or anything, you get the indication that there's something interesting happening there. Okay. We are going to retop this character now because we blocked in all the important stuff. I jumped ahead a little bit. I threw some fingers and things in there too. So when you're retopping, a few different things you can do. You could be really precise about this. You could take this into a Maya or a Blender or whatever and make every little edge look perfect. Or you can think, hey, I'm making a design here. I'm not making a final asset. So I'm going to use the tools that come with ZBrush. And they have some instant retop tools that are really powerful. And what I'm doing here is I'm painting red and blue. This is not his color scheme. This is actually to focus detail. So I want to make sure that the face has a lot of high-res detail, and the body has some, and then the areas that really don't need much, I painted blue. So red means make this dense, white means make it neutral, blue means make it loose. And you can see I've turned on use polypaint under ZRemesher, and I've tweaked some of the settings to follow the flow, the adaptive size to like 90 something. Now that sculpt before was 2.8 million polygons, I believe, and this one is 28,000. But you can see we've lost all of our detail. But don't fret. If you guys are, some people I know who are very savvy in ZBrush, they hate this process. They think it's really scary. They're going to lose all their information. This is actually, to me, one of the most freeing processes when it works easily, because we want to make sure that we're able to pose this character later on. And by retopping it and just adding, we just simply divide it, and we're going to project the detail back onto it. We're going to attain all that detail and be able to go in and add even another level, all that tertiary, all that top level detail. So what I've done is I've divided it and projected. And I have a solo mode on, you'll see in the bottom right corner. And all that means is that I have multiple subtools being viewed, the high-res sculpt and the low-res sculpt. But that by solo being on, only the one I'm highlighting is going to be visible. Because when this is all done, I want to make sure that if I flip between the two, there is no difference between the high-res sculpt and the new retopped, reprojected sculpt. So why reproject? What you can see me doing right here is doing gigantic anatomy changes. Like these hands were very sloppy. And when you're working rough, like Dynamesh mode, I do recommend you don't get too perfect with your final sculpts, but just get the main beats and then retop, and then go in and refine. It doesn't mean like forget a finger or forget, to put legs on them, although we did on this character because I didn't need to worry about it. The process is so fast though that if you want, you could just add legs to this character, Dynamesh it, remesh it, and then project the whole thing again, and it would go very, very quickly. What's nice here is my topology is following those design beats that I sculpted in. So now I can go in and actually add a lot of higher fidelity detail. Now, I get the question a lot of like, how high res do you work when you're done? And I don't work that high res. Once a character is approved and I'm getting into that next level, I might take it up to a, per subtool 30 million polygon fully detailed sculpt. But at this stage, this is about as far as I'm going to take him. We'll add more detail, of course, but I'm not going to worry about making maps. I'm not going to worry about getting every pore perfect. That will come later. And honestly, that's not the job really as a concept artist most of the time. Most of the time, your job is to get the idea. And the job is kind of evolving and changing all the time, but it used to be that you could do maybe a napkin sketch and hand it off to a sculptor, and they were going to do a lot of this stuff, which was still design work, but they were going to be refining it. Nowadays, especially for creature work, we're kind of required to do kind of multiple people's in the past job, where you're going to take the rough idea, you're going to put it in scenes, you're going to get really high level of detail, because this thing could be 3D printed as a maquette or as a stand-in on set. It could then get a clay pour on it, and the amazing artists at some practical effects shop might give it a next level detail. Or it might just go to a VFX shop, and they're going to go in there and give it that, we call that like plussing the design. And in the best of times, that's how it works. You have a design that you're 70 to 90% done with, and you pass it off, and the next time you see it on screen, it looks incredible, and it's been moved up. Because of this process, though, it looks so finished. A lot of times when you're done, what you've done is what's going to show up on screen. So if there's some area that you really feel that you failed on, or that you're not happy with, that might make it all the way to the end. So now I am actually doing a little bit of poly painting. I'm not going to get too fancy with it, but what I'm trying to do is just highlight some detail out. And this is going to be kind of big paint over stuff, so you'll see some kind of odd color choices happening, but where I want to show some color break happening. And I like this bluey, green, yellow kind of thing we got going on. So I'm going to kind of paint in my crevices a little bit with this purple, darker area. And part of this is thinking of the natural color scheme, and part of this is thinking of guiding the viewer's eye. Because patterning at this stage, I generally will do in 2D once I've rendered him out. Maybe we'll put some tattoos on him. Maybe he'll have some sort of interesting skin pattern on top. We could do it all in ZBrush, but the problem is doing options. That means that we have to keep sending this thing back over to Keyshot, which you can do. And oftentimes, once I do a round like we're going to do in this process, I will jump back into ZBrush and apply some of these changes to the character. So because we've retopped, I can actually start thinking a little bit about detail. This is a little skin detail just to break out of that CG sculpted, just everything feels too perfect. So I'm just using a scatter brush with a very simple noise. And this is just kind of adding a little bit of interesting detail, not precise. Now I'm using those kind of long, raky lines to add some wrinkling. And this is just a first pass. All of this will probably get smoothed away or developed over, sculpted over. But I do find that for these rough design passes, it's great to kind of block this out really quickly and then throw some detail in there. But then as you can see, I'm going in with the elastic brush and I'm pulling out some of the stamped on detail. the last thing you want to do when you're working on this, first off, I'm staying in symmetry for too long here. You'll see I change that in a little bit. But the last thing you want to do is just apply a bunch of random textures onto your guy. And